From childhood, Emma lived in the shade, in which it was impossible to recognize her own reflection. Only a silhouette, barely distinguishable, and as if suppressed from common space. Her older sister Hannah is a bright, uncompromisingly radiant, as if fate herself contained all the hopes and expectations of her parents, losing on her shoulders that light that Emma learned to perceive as something alien and unattainable. From an early age, the house was filled with conversations in which Hannah's name sounded as an unchanged sign of success, and achievements as a standard that should have been striving, but which Emma seemed an unattainable bar erected above the sky. The views of the parents invariably glided over Hannah with admiration and pride, as if every act of her was a grandiose achievement, and a smile was the best gift to the world. Emma remained aside, as if an inconspicuous shadow whose existence was barely justified, the second daughter, with which it was impossible to compare and which was not destined to shine. From early childhood, her efforts, aspirations, and internal victories often remained invisible, dissolving in a cold comparison, as if she were just a background for a star sister. Parental words filled with implicit reproach and inescapable criticism, as if discarded the shadow of doubt about their own value, developing her ability to be invisible and quiet. Hannah herself seemed the embodiment of lightness and success, beautiful, confident, with the unconditional attention and praise of others. She easily conquered any space that was included. Her stories about plans, dreams, and victories seemed not just stories, but a whole world where there was no place for weaknesses and errors. Emma looked at her sister with a contradictory feeling. On the one hand, pride in a family relationship. On the other, a bitter longing from the fact that she herself could never be like Hannah. Her own achievements seemed modest and nondescript against the backdrop of the brilliance of his sister, and attempts to stand out were perceived as in vain and even ridiculous. In the house where every day began with Hannah's praise and inconspicuous but sharp comparisons, Emma learned to hide her feelings, close from pain and disappointment, as if it were a necessary condition for survival. Sometimes it seemed that her own I was only part of a large family performance, where she has a second plan role devoid of light and applause. Parents did not notice how her eyes were filled with fatigue and bitterness, did not hear the quiet sighs and suppressed issues that she did not dare to voice. Each of its success was perceived not as a reason for pride, but rather for granted that it could never be compared with the triumphs of Hannah. Emma often caught herself thinking that she seemed to be completely growing up into an endless process of searching for her place, which always remained outside the attention and support of the family. Two worlds reigned in her life. The world of Hannah is bright and successful, filled with love and approval, and her own is quiet, inconspicuous, filled with a struggle for recognition, which never came. And even despite all this shadow, which seemed to hang over her since childhood, at heart, Emma had hope that one day she could break out of this constant comparison and prove that her life is also significant. And yet, while Hannah was the center of the parents' universe and her smile illuminated the house, Emma learned to live in the shade, in the shadow of her sister, under whose canopy her inner is a quiet but unquenchable struggle. When Hannah finished school, her future seemed a foregone conclusion, as if all the roads were laid out with gold tiles leading to success and comfort, and the parents readily opened the doors in front of her, which remained locked for Emma. They made their decision to pay for training and even rent a separate apartment for Hannah easily and without hesitation, as if these investments were simply a continuation of the eternal approval and support that the sister deserved. All this brilliance, this unconditional faith and financial assistance, seemed to Emma an alien, unattainable world, where it was not necessary to fight for every little thing, where there was no place for doubts and fears. At the same moment, when Hannah received congratulations and promises of the light path, Emma reported that it was not provided for her training and money, that she should deal with this issue herself, a phrase that sounded coldly and finally as if the door slammed a key. Parents did not discuss or offer help. It seemed to them natural to leave the youngest daughter alone with her problems, as if the test of independence should strengthen her character and will. For Emma, this meant not only the struggle for education, but also a clash with loneliness, with a continuous load of responsibility, which lay on her shoulders much earlier than she was ready for this. Work, study, loans, everything was bombarded into a single chain, in which she had to balance daily, like an acrobat on a rope. The first steps on the path to independence were heavy and hopeless. Long hours at work, attempts to combine study with a load that does not allow to relax for a minute. While her parents did not notice her efforts, as if considering the granted that Emma was simply obliged to cope, she fought daily with the inner feeling of inferiority, which caused comparisons with her sister. You could achieve more if you tried the same way Hannah, penetrated deeply and poisoned confidence in your own abilities. Emma understood that her path would be more difficult and was forced to learn to hide fatigue and anxiety in order not to create reasons for the next accusations of insufficient diligence. Parents, absorbed in the successes of the eldest daughter, did not notice how the youngest lives in a state of constant stress and tension. Do not give her either words of support or simple human warmth. In their eyes, she was more likely to be fulfilled than a person with his needs and dreams. And Emma, taking on all this severity, still did not allow herself to give up, despite the inner pain and disappointment that squeezed the heart. Debts, sleepless nights, lack of sleep, and constant feeling that the world around her is arranged so that it would be harder. All this did not break Emma, but made it stronger. In this struggle, she learned to find in herself the sparks of the light, which gave hope and power to move forward. She began to know the price of each of her victory, even if for others they seemed invisible and insignificant. All that she did was like a quiet protest against injustice, against being eternal second in the family, against fate, which seemed to order her forever in the shadow of her sister. And even if the parents did not see these efforts and did not want to notice them, Emma did not allow herself to dissolve in silence. Every day was a test, but also the proof of its strength, not only physical, but also spiritual. This struggle became its inner world, where she gradually learned to appreciate herself and understand that her life is not just a reflection of other people's expectations, but an independent story that has yet to be written. After graduation, Emma was hardly settled in an initial position in a small company, where, despite the modest level of income and an endless stream of duties, she first felt at least a little independent. However, reality was much more severe than it represented. A constant feeling of debts and obligations, lack of sleep, emotional burnout, and most importantly, the quiet pressure that hung over it, like an invisible network, woven from family expectations and responsibilities. Her financial situation remained shaky. Loans, payments for rented housing, the need to postpone even for elementary needs, all this became continuous stress, which was difficult to explain to those who were used to perceiving it as a background or just part of the background. But the most difficult and contradictory moment came when the parents, faced with financial difficulties due to problems with the work of his father, began to turn to Emma with requests for help, despite her modest position and their own debts. Each such appeal caused her internal conflict. On the one hand, a sense of duty and desire to support the family. On the other hand, a feeling of injustice and disappointment that it was she, which always remained in the shade, now forced to stretch them out of the crisis. This pressure was not just financial, but emotional. Requests sounded not as a question, but as an expectation, as an obligation that cannot be ignored. And despite the fatigue and internal protest, Emma agreed, sending the money that she could barely postpone, thereby getting tangled in her obligations. Meanwhile, Hannah, continuing to receive from parents not only material support, but also numerous gifts, seemed a living reminder of how family recognition and love should be. Unconditional, light, joyful. Compared to this, Emma felt like a prisoner of invisible financial chains, which were still tightly compressing her life, depriving freedom and opportunity for growth. She watched a world around her, in which success and attention does not get merit, but according to a predetermined scenario, where she always remains in the background, and Hannah, the main character, the center of the family universe. These circumstances could not but influence her inner world. Each transfer of money was perceived not as an act of goodwill, but as another step in the endless ladder of the requirements and expectations that she had to rise, losing her strength and self-confidence. Each time, this load became heavier, and even the smallest moments of joy were increasingly overshadowed by anxiety and doubts. Emma began to notice that her relationship with her parents was changing, but not for the better. Love and support that she longed for turned into endless debts and obligations, as if the family stopped seeing a person in it, and only the source of funds began to be considered. This financial dependence created in the life of Emma a sense of isolation and loneliness, which was especially acute against the backdrop of comparisons with her sister. She felt that she was expected not of personal happiness or success, but to fulfill the role of the victim, the one who always gives but never receives confessions or gratitude in response. At such moments, it became especially difficult for her to maintain mental balance, because she understood, if she does not refuse to help, she would continue to lose herself. And if she refuses, he could lose the remnants of communication with his family. This choice between duty and its own well-being became a real test for her, which for a long time did not give rest to her thoughts and feelings. In the house where Hannah remained a symbol of lightness and success, Emma continued to fight with invisible chains of financial and emotional obligations, which seemed to have constrained her more and more every day, leaving no space for freedom and real joy. And in this struggle, she more and more clearly understood that in order to break out of these shackles, she would have to not only step over fears and doubts, but also find the strength to say no to those who are used to taking, but not to give. But while this moment seemed remote and almost impossible, too much was put on the map, too much was lost, and too little understanding from relatives. The increase at the work that Emma achieved for years has finally happened. Her efforts and perseverance seem to have received a well-deserved recognition in a professional environment, and this event was supposed to be a fracture point, a joyful moment that she dreamed of dividing with relatives. However, the reality turned out to be different. In a house where even the most significant successes of the youngest daughter remained unnoticed, the news of its achievement was met in silence and indifference, as if it were an event that did not matter for parents who continued to expect only one thing from it: an increase in financial assistance. Emma felt an internal protest, which every day became louder, but outwardly continued to obey these unspoken requirements, as if part of her itself disappeared under the weight of obligations and invisible expectations. Time passed, and the financial requests from the family became more persistent and uncontrollable, turning Emma into a kind of source that was supposed to endlessly fill other people's needs, without receiving anything other than fatigue and a sense of their own neoquence. Against the backdrop of this situation, its recently extinguished student loan, the result of long 7 years of struggle and perseverance, seemed not just a financial achievement, but a symbol of personal victory, which, however, was devoid of all kinds of celebration and recognition in the family. On the contrary, an attempt to even celebrate this important point in the habitual shadow of Hannah, who, as if specifically, stole attention and joy, announcing a new rich guy and forcing everyone to turn their faces to themselves. This situation became for Emma as a turning point, when all the accumulated disappointment and pain resulted in a deep feeling of loneliness and incomprehensibility. The holiday, which was supposed to be her personal triumph, turned into a scene where she was again in the shade, and her successes in the shadow of other people's achievements and desires. Parents, plunged into admiration for the eldest daughter, seemed to not even notice how the youngest was repulsed by this, forcing her to feel a stranger in her own house. Emma could no longer hide the growing inner indignation, but the habit of learning, maintaining the appearance of family harmony and calm did not allow her to take a decisive step and voice everything that was accumulating in her soul. Every day, pressure and understatement accumulated, aggravating a sense of injustice, which penetrated into all spheres of life, from work to personal relationships, depriving Emma of joy and the opportunity to feel full and significant. More and more she realized that the family, which was supposed to be a support, in fact became a source of pain and emotional exhaustion, where love was measured not by sincere feelings, but conventions and material flows. Festive moments, instead of strengthening the connection, only emphasized the abyss of misunderstanding and alienation that grew between her and relatives. And despite all this, Emma continued to fulfill the duties assigned to it, as if on a machine, denying herself in a vacation, in personal joys, and even the opportunity to just be himself. Every evening, returning home after a long working day, she felt the severity of not only physical, but also moral, as if an invisible burden of expectations and obligations that did not give a minute of respite piled on her shoulders. And in those rare moments when it seemed that Hannah could be a little inhaling and relaxed, with a new success, new attention, new light, which again obscured everything that was important for Emma. This endless series of events was the last straw that overwhelmed the bowl of patience and causing an internal crisis that could not be ignored more. But no matter how painful this moment was, he remained not the word of the end, but only the beginning of a new, deeper struggle. The struggle for himself, for his place, for the right to be noticed and heard. And while this change matured in Emma's soul, the usual conversations continued to sound in the house, in which Hannah remained the main character, and she herself was a shadow that no one was in a hurry to make out. The removal of Emma from the family did not happen instantly, but it was inevitable and gradual, like a slow attenuation of fire, which was burning for a long time inside. And now he began to dull under the oppression of disappointment and fatigue. Contacts began to contract, calls and messages less often, first on trifles, then more and more conscious as protection, as an attempt to preserve the remnants of strength and mental balance. Relations with a sister, who once seemed inextricable, began to resemble a thin thread stretched to the limit, ready to break from the slightest tension. Emma felt that there was an abyss that could simply be crossed between them or close with conversations, because over the years there has accumulated too much unspoken, too much pain and resentment. It was during this period that the unexpected call, the voice of Hannah, cold and demanding, sounded like a challenge. "I want a birthday present." It was not just a requirement, but another reminder that the role that the sister used to play in their family remains unchanged, and Emma is only a source of resources and capabilities. The bell knocked her out of the usual balance, made her look at herself from the side, and realize how far she went from those relationships that once seemed unshakable and natural. It was like the last check, how far she is ready to go in her desire for independence and recognition of herself as an individual. The celebration of Hannah's birthday, in an expensive restaurant, where Emma was invited rather because of the duty than out of desire, became a kind of scene in which all the old wounds and conflicts again came out. Once, where attention and admiration inexorably belonged to Hannah, Emma felt a stranger even among relatives, as if a spectator in a play where her role was reduced to the silent presence and support of the main star. The atmosphere of the celebration was permeated with undisguised favoritism, which was manifested not only in words, but also in gestures, views, and behavior of others, as if the very space around Hannah was filled with light, and only shadows remained for Emma. In the midst of the evening, when it seemed that the tension had reached the limit, Emma gained courage and came out with frank recognition to all those present, violating the usual order and the silent adoption of family roles. Her words sounded loudly and clearly, revealing the deep wounds that she wore in her soul for many years, about a sense of injustice, about pain from constant comparisons, about how hard it is to be a second choice, about how difficult it is to live when they do not see and do not hear. It was not just an accusation, but a challenge abandoned to a family, demanding that mistakes and look at relationships from a new side, at the level of honesty and respect. The moments of the silence that followed her speech seemed endless. Each present seemed to try to comprehend what he heard, but no one could immediately give an answer or find words of comfort. The atmosphere was tense and heavy, as if the whole family was on the verge of changes, which none of them was yet ready to accept. For Emma, this performance was not just an act of courage, but a symbol of its internal struggle for the right to be himself, for the right to demand respect and recognition, even if for this it was necessary to destroy the usual illusions and arrange everything in their places. It was at this moment that Emma first felt that her voice, drowned and ignored for many years, could be heard, and that her struggle is not just a personal drama, but a challenge that could change the entire structure of relations in the family. But at the same time, she realized that such a step entails new trials, new conflicts, and possibly even greater isolation. And yet, despite fear and uncertainty, in her soul there was no longer a place for silence and humility. There was only a determination to move on, to its truth, no matter how difficult and painful it was. Emma's refusal to send another translation to parents was not just an act of a financial nature. It was a kind of gap of invisible but durable bonds that associated her with her family, and the moment when she finally ceased to obey the old rules and expectations. This refusal caused a storm of anger and insults from the parents who perceived such behavior as a betrayal and personal insult, not wanting to admit that it was their attitude and demands that brought the daughter to such a step. In their eyes, Emma ceased to be flexible and obedient, which could be used as a financial resource and emotional pillow, and now has become a source of problems and inconvenience. The accusations and pressure fell upon her with renewed vigor. The parents resorted to manipulations, threatened with the loss of family ties and support, tried to cause guilt and duty that kept Emma in captivity of duties for so long. But the inner barrier, which she built in herself, turned out to be stronger than these words, because at heart she understood. To continue to live in such conditions meant to finally lose herself and her dignity. And although loneliness and breakdown with loved ones brought pain, she could no longer ignore her own needs and fatigue from an endless struggle. In this difficult period, the support of other relatives came to the rescue. Those who saw and appreciated Emma as it is, who understood her struggle, and did not condemn the choice of being independent. These ties became a support for her, allowed to feel that she is not one, that there is another world, where her efforts and feelings are significant and important. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt that she was not only heard, but also accepted, that her choice is not wrong or selfish, but rather a necessary step towards internal liberation and self-arrangement. It began to build my own life for Emma, not just a necessity, but a symbol of the new stage. A stage when she learned to take care of herself, set her own boundaries, and create a space in which you can breathe and develop. This restructuring of life required efforts and discipline, but gave a feeling of control and freedom, which was not enough for so long. Each ruble accumulated, every small victory became a brick in the foundation of a new reality, where she herself became the author of her fate, and not just a participant in other people's scenarios. Despite all this, a gap with his family left deep wounds, a sense of loss, bitterness, and unresolved questions that returned from time to her thoughts, recalling that no independence could completely replace family warmth and support. But now, when Emma has already made her choice and stepped on the path where she herself was the main thing, she had to learn to live with this new balance, between the pain of the gap and the hope of the best future, between freedom and responsibility, which now lay exclusively on her shoulders. In these changes, in the struggle and search, in new relations and internal discoveries, Emma gradually found not only the power to survive, but also to start living for real, as she dreamed, despite all the difficulties and contradictions that still remained in her way. The first visit of the parents to Emma's apartment was like an unexpected wind, which simultaneously shook it and made me think about how much changed recently. Their appearance was not solemn or festive. Rather, it was a timid and cautious step, as if they themselves felt that they were in an unfamiliar territory, not only physically, but also emotionally. Over the years that have passed since the last serious conflict, a lot has accumulated. Bitterness, resentment, silence, which was hard to break. But now it seemed the family tried to start all over again, although with great doubt and caution. In the conversations that they led, the first words of confession sounded, words that there were not enough for so long, honest and simple, but at the same time filled with a load of regret and understanding of their mistakes. Parents, despite the years of habits and established views, first allowed themselves to admit that their attitude to Emma was unfair, that love cannot be measured only by successes and external achievements, that every child deserves to be noticed and heard. Their requests for forgiveness were not just a formal gesture, but an attempt to penetrate the inner world that they once lost sight of, to understand the pain that they involuntarily caused. Emma listened to their words, feeling mixed emotions, from relief and gratitude to doubt and caution. It was not easy for her to believe that these confessions could really mean changes, because years have built barriers, and the habits of returning to the old schemes seemed stronger than new promises. But at the same time, hope arose inside, quiet but stable, which now, when the truth has become obvious, you can start building relationships again, already at a different level, where there is a place for respect and understanding, and not only duties and expectations. In the same period, Emma received a letter from Hannah, an unexpected and perhaps one of the most important events in a long time. In a letter, the sister openly recognized the injustice with which they treated Emma, expressed regret for her own participation in family dynamics, which caused pain, and asked for an understanding. This letter was not a simple apology. It was an attempt to establish a dialogue, a statement about the desire to understand and accept another person, despite all the differences and complexity of the past. It felt sincerity, which became an unexpected bridge for Emma between the two long, all-mighted sisters. Reading these words made Emma think about how important it is to be able to not only speak, but also hear, not only demand, but also forgive. This was a step towards to be a captive of the past and start creating a new story in which relations between sisters could become a source of support and strength, and not pain and disappointment. Hannah's letter showed that even the most confusing and complex family nodes can be unraveled if there is a desire and willingness to meet each other. The internal dialogue of Emma was overwhelmed with various feelings, from cautious optimism to fear of possible changes that they could lead. But the main thing is that it began to occur in her soul, is the understanding that the path to healing and restoration requires not only time, but also the courage to open your heart. Allow yourself to be vulnerable and at the same time strong. It was in this state, on the verge between the past and the future, that she began to realize that a real family is not an ideal picture, but a complex and multifaceted process in which there is a place for mistakes, forgiveness, and hope. These days and weeks, filled with new conversations and meetings, Emma gradually learned to release old grievances, see people for their mistakes, and understand that each of them is just a person who is also looking for love and recognition. It was not easy, and the path was still long, but for the first time in a long time she felt that she was moving forward, not one, but with those who were ready to go nearby, rebuilding her previous relations for new, more honest and deeper foundations. Emma accepted the invitation to meet with her parents, although skepticism had long been hung inside her. Recalling how often the words about changes and promises seemed empty, and attempts to converge the rapprochement ended with disappointment. However, on that day, the atmosphere was different. The conversation was held calmly, without reproaches and accusations, as if all participants first allowed themselves to hear each other truly, without a familiar mask of discontent and silent expectation. In this dialogue, not only silence appeared, but also a space for understanding, for an attempt to see the past not as a battlefield, but as a story where everyone made mistakes, but everyone sought love and acceptance. Parents first said that it was painful to realize how much suffering was caused by comparisons and an unequal attitude, how much they want to correct their behavior so as not to lose the daughter, who for many years was not just the second in a row, but very close in spirit. Emma listened and felt how the severity of previous insults gradually let go inside, which for a long time constrained her heart and interfered with living. It was important not so much to hear promises as to feel sincerity, which penetrated into every word and gesture, and in response, it also could not help but reveal her fears, doubts, and hopes to a new chapter of relations. In parallel, Emma built her life, a new apartment, which became not just a place of residence, but a symbol of independence and personal freedom. A machine that gave a feeling of movement and control over its time. Work where now she felt confident and valuable. Friends who became support and a source of joy. Travels that expanded the horizons and filled the life of new impressions. All this was not a given. It was her own victory over the difficulties and pain which she learned to manage and turn due to the movement of the forward. The adoption that family relationships can remain complex and ambiguous has become an important awareness for Emma, which freed from illusions about perfection and absolute harmony. She realized that love is not a lack of conflicts or expectations, but the ability to find a balance between his needs and the needs of others. The ability to see in a person not only past mistakes, but also a desire for the better, even if the path to this is far and thorny. It was in this balance sheet that Emma found hope, the hope that you can live, maintaining dignity and respect, building relationships on honesty and mutual understanding, even if they are not perfect. Thus, the path of Emma, from a sense of constant shadow and struggle for a place under the sun, through pain and disappointment, for acceptance and internal freedom, has become a story not only about the family, but also about growing up, about the formation of a person who is able not only to survive, but also to live fully, opening new horizons and opportunities. Her story shows that even in the most difficult and confusing family relationships, there is a space for changes and growth if there is a desire and strength to move forward. It is this result, the awareness of their own value, the adoption of the imperfection of the world and loved ones, the ability to forgive and open, makes life truly alive, and the relationship genuine and significant. This is the real hope, in the ability to start again, creating its own story full of light and warmth, even if the shadows of the past are sometimes reminded of themselves.